Great, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to speak about our programs here at Truckers Against Trafficking. Um, a lot of people don't realize the ways that traffickers kind of exploit individuals along our transportation and transit industries. And so Truckers Against Trafficking has been allies with this industry to really educate those members on human trafficking, what to look for, and then how to properly report it. Because exploitation, as we'll see, and I'll talk about some case studies and how our programs really try to close those loopholes, but we'll see that human trafficking is really occurring quite frequently along our transportation industries. And so this is a great opportunity to implement some of our programs within your local communities, especially with different agencies, to kind of stop this heinous crime around that area. To kind of start off, I want to talk about a case example that happened about 5 years ago. You might have heard of it. This is Laura Swanson and Adlar Hodza. And they made national news when they were arrested at a Virginia truck stop. And troopers were called to the scene of this RV based on some suspicious activity. And these two individuals, they invited troopers in. They were real friendly. They said they were just kind of traveling the States, visiting Swanson's daughter and kind of doing some sightseeing. And as they're kind of chatting with troopers there, one of the troopers noticed that was a young girl in the back of the RV. Her head was down. She wasn't engaged in the conversation. Her hair was kind of matted, like she hadn't showered in a while, but her face was heavily made up with makeup. And as these two were continuing to talk to troopers, they pointed to a monument outside the front window of the RV that they saw earlier that day. And kind of everybody drew their attention that way. But that one trooper caught eye contact with that young girl, and she motioned that she needed some help. So the trooper walked her outside the RV, and as soon as they got around the convenience store and away from viewing distance of the RV, the girl began to break down and cry. And she said that the suspects had kidnapped her from her home back in Clive, Iowa, and that they'd been abusing her both physically and sexually. She couldn't remember the last time she had anything to eat or drink, adding that it was probably several days. Right away, they're like, well, let's get this girl some medical attention. Let's get her into an ambulance. And as paramedics began to kind of examine her, she's like, you're going to see bruises and branding all over my body. Because these two were actually heating up different utensils on the stove in the RV and then burning her with those. And she even made an attempt to run away, and they actually took nails, rusty nails, and it dug it into her feet so she wouldn't make that attempt again. Comes to find out through the investigation that she was forced to perform sex acts on Hodza and another unknown male that very same day. And doctors say that, if troopers hadn't been called, and we'll come back to how they were called, but if troopers hadn't been called and they hadn't arrived on scene and got her medical attention, she more than likely probably would have died in a matter of weeks due to the starvation, abuse, and neglect from these two. And unfortunately, this is what is occurring, and this is what human trafficking is looking like along our nation's roadways. So in response to those realities, Truckers Against Trafficking recognize that, this transportation industry, these truckers, these drivers can, really make a huge difference based on the sheer size, the very nature of their jobs. And, although this list right here is not exhaustive, from truck stops, rest areas, hotels, motels, bus terminals, drivers are often in places where they can come in contact with a victim of human trafficking. And so our idea is to educate these drivers on what to look for and how to properly report it, ensuring that more lives could be saved and more traffickers arrested.
Louis, can we pause for just a second? Are we recording?
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, Truckers Against Trafficking was started in 2009 with the mission to really educate, equip, empower, and immobilize members of the trucking and transportation industry as part of their everyday jobs. And so we have three main goals in doing that. Our first main goal is to really saturate the industry with our training materials. We'll get into the depth of these for each of our programs, but it really consists of, that DVD or that training video that can be found online, and then accompanied wallet cards or posters materials specific to those individual niches within the transportation industry. One of our primary tools that we use, as Nanette alluded to, is our TAT wallet card. And this is a simple piece of paper that goes in the pockets, purses, wallets of those drivers out there. On the front, it has that National Human Trafficking hotline that we're talking about, 1-888-3737-888. And this is kind of really the number that, because of our drivers are so mobile, whether they're local or they go across the country, we really try to utilize the National Human Trafficking Hotline, but we don't discourage them calling local law enforcement. However, as Allison mentioned, a lot of times the hotline is connected to law enforcement and agencies specifically there to respond to human trafficking situations. On the back side of that wallet card, we have that warning not to approach traffickers on their own. We really try to encourage drivers, employees to make that call from the anonymity of their cab or their store versus getting directly involved. And then when you open up that wallet card, the basic definition of human trafficking is there. So it's a reminder. And it kind of asks, some of those basic information that law enforcement need to open up an investigation. So, a driver may, record license plates, dates or times, descriptions of individuals, all these important information to be passed on to law enforcement. On the right-hand side, we have questions if they find themselves in a conversation that they can ask to identify the situation. Do they know where they are? Any talk of making money or a quota, or if they have an ID on them. And then some other additional red flags that they can be on the lookout for. I do want to mention that we have a TAT app for Android or iPhone. You can go onto your app store for your phone and download that app. It's really user-friendly. It has our wallet card, all that information, and then it's directly connected to the Polaris hotline. So, if a community member or a driver out there sees something that they're curious about, suspicious, they have that app, they can pull it up, they can type in, their questions that they might be dealing with this situation, or just be able to call the hotline directly. And then our other primary tool that we use specifically for the trucking industry is our Phase 2 DVD. This is an easy plug and play 30-minute training video to really educate those drivers on human trafficking and the ways that they can report it. And then accompanying within those long haul truck drivers are things like our window decal, we'll talk about that, our Everyday Heroes poster, or the Make the Call, Save the Lives, to really encourage those. And these can be hung up in truck stops, rest areas, to encourage those drivers to be on the lookout and get involved in this issue. And then we also have our window decals. The image on the right-hand side where it says no lot lizards, this is a pretty common term that's used to describe prostituted people in the transportation industry. Which is pretty unfortunate, using this term, even though they're trying to deter a prostitution, forced prostitution around these industries, they're still degrading that individual. You're calling them a lizard, they're dehumanizing them. And so here at TAT, we really want to change people's mentality, their mindset of looking at these individuals as not someone as a nuisance that's knocking on the cab of that truck at night, but more as somebody that needs some help. And so we've created that window decal to kind of replace that sticker. It reminds those drivers, one, of the real important critical role they can play, as well as a reminder of the number they can call to get involved. In 2019, so just last year, we had a Lake Lines bus driver that was driving down the road on their route, and a young female approached the driver, and she said that she was being held against her will and forced into prostitution by a male passenger on that same bus. This driver had our training. They gave dispatch a call, and dispatch sprung into action and got the security team involved, as well as local law enforcement. So they stopped that bus on its route. They were able to get her medical attention and services, as well as arrest her perpetrator. And this is TAT in action. And it's the very reason why we created our Busing on the Lookout, or bottle program. Because we realize, as working with the transportation industry, that the busing industry plays a huge part of that, and that bus drivers, terminal workers, maintenance staff, ticket counter personnel. They're also on the front lines. They see many things that we do not, and they're really strategically placed to really assist law enforcement in regards to identifying human trafficking situations around that specific industry. And even though, we teach, those specific things to look for in those red flags, it's also about just being aware and having some understanding and trust when somebody does go to a driver or an employee member and let them know that they might be in distress or need help. And then, as you can see from here, there are some major intersections with human trafficking and the transit industries. So just in 2018, Polaris did do a study and comes to find out that survivors of domestic sex trafficking, so up to 42% of them were involved, or their traffickers used local or long distance buses in their exploitation. So knowing that and the multiple ways that traffickers really tried to exploit victims, we wanted to target this area. And again, that could be from traffickers, grooming or recruiting at bus terminals or on buses. It could be that initial online enticements or false advertisement. And so maybe that individual is taking the bus to a job or to a modeling contract. Or, they could be utilizing the buses to transport their victims from the places where they're being sold. And then sadly, we do want to focus on the school bus aspect because, some victims of human trafficking and some school students out there are being trafficked at nights and on the weekends while still attending school during the day. And that school bus driver, they see these kids every day as they're picking them up from the bus stop and taking them to school. So they can identify things in changes of behaviors, moods, physical appearances. They also get to see who is dropping off that student at the bus stop or picking them up. And they can really be aware of some of those, manipulative or controlling behaviors. So, we think that probably all school staff should really be trained on human trafficking. But, as you know, a lot of times the school bus drivers are in places where the teachers, principals, and counselors are not. So they really play an important role in identifying kids that are at risk or potentially being trafficked. So again, our Busing on the Lookout program comprises of that training video, easy plug and play, and then accompanying specific materials that are directly for the bus industry. To give you another example, just last year in Texas, there was a gentleman, he was working with a construction crew. This construction crew kind of went from city to city throughout the state for different jobs. But the manager of this construction crew kind of took everybody's IDs, their work permits. He was a foreign national. They took most of their belongings. And after a few months for working with this construction company, they hadn't paid them. And so this young man confronts the foreman, the manager, and the manager refuses to pay him. And they decide to abandon him in the last city they were working in. So he finds himself in the middle of Texas, has no idea what city he's in, has no idea, no belongings, and he just starts walking down the road. And he gets to a Greyhound bus station, and he goes in there, kind of explains his situation to two terminal employees about getting a bus ticket back home. And they had both received some TAT training, and so they thought this was pretty unusual. They decided to give the hotline a call. They even shared some of their lunch with this young man, and the hotline was able to get them connected with services. So they provided him a bus ticket home, temporary housing. They got him some medical attention for the injuries he received on the job, and even connected him with law enforcement. And so, again, just another example of the success of this program in trying to reach individuals, that would have ignored this situation in the past or maybe asked them to move on. But now being aware and educated about some of the situations that happen with human trafficking, they were able to be gracious and competent in being able to assist this individual. And then another way that we really try to work with the bus or transit industry is creating posters or information intended for victims. So, according to the hotline, most callers into the hotline are community members, but followed after that are typically victims themselves seeking services. So knowing that, coupled with the ways that human trafficking intersects with the transit industry, we work with a number of survivors of domestic sex trafficking to kind of create some posters that kind of language and imaging that is eye-catching for victims of human trafficking, to really let them know that they're not alone and there are services out there. Um, these posters are great. They could be put up in bus terminals, bus shelters, inside the buses. We have them in vertical, horizontal orientation, in English and Spanish. And they're also a great way to educate the community, one, about the vulnerabilities that men, women, children are to susceptible of traffickers' tactics. And then it also kind of lets traffickers know that your community is aware and vigilant and that human trafficking really won't be tolerated. And then we also have something specific to the oil and gas industry, our Empower Freedom program. Because we recognize that there's a lot of intersections with the transportation industry and the exploration of energy. Some parts of our country, say like North Dakota or Alaska, you'll have these boom towns where they've discovered, a natural resource there. They have a large group of people that all of a sudden are going to move there. Typically, it's, younger males, single males. And now you have this area where there's a large group of male populations. They have an expendable income and nowhere to spend that money. And so traffickers, they take advantage of this. They'll take victims of domestic sex trafficking to these locations where they can be sold and exploited. And let's not forget some of the labor trafficking that occurs around these areas, to include, building the roads, the construction of the housings or the buildings and offices. So this is an area where human trafficking does exist that, sometimes is forgotten, but we really want to hit this specific industry with information, again, that training video and accompanied wallet card and materials that are specific to what those would see around the oil and gas industry and human trafficking. And then we also want to work with, the truck stop and travel plaza industries, because that's a huge part of our network of highways across our country. And so here's a great example where, two employees made a huge difference in an ongoing investigation, as well as the lives of a few human trafficking victims. One of the managers at a TA Travel Plaza in Jessup, Maryland, he was doing his nightly rounds. He's checking the pumps, checking the mechanic shop, and even the motel that was attached. And then the night porter, Alan Bailey, comes up to the manager and he's like, "Hey, I just saw this girl. She was dressed productively. She looks young. I'm thinking it might be forced prostitution." And, they go up, they have a conversation with this girl, as well as the driver that brought this young lady. And they're thinking, yeah, I think this is forced prostitution based on what we've been trained on. And so they give the Howard County Police Department a call, and comes to find out, as soon as detectives arrive, they recognize this young girl from an X Factor ad they've been investigating on a website called Backpage.com. And comes to find out that these three suspects right here, the two males and the females, they were actually trafficking 12 women in various states, forcing them into drug addictions, forcing them to take drugs, making them work long hours, threatening them under force, duress, physical violence, and making them work those sex acts and taking the money for them. And all because of the call of these two truck stop employees, based on the training that they received, they were able to recover 6 of the women that were being trafficked by this ring. And so again, we do have training specifically for truck stop or travel plaza employees. Right now, especially during COVID-19, a lot of our training is virtual, but we do have a live training. So if there's truck stops or travel plazas in your state that are interested, we'd love to connect with them and get them set up for our next training. That also partners with law enforcement to really facilitate the investigation of human trafficking. And we've co-created models that are being used across the country in multiple states. We truly believe that law enforcement and the trucking industry, transportation industry, need to be partners in closing these loopholes to traffickers. And we really try to bring federal, state, local agencies, along with those key industry stakeholders, on a routine basis to do just that. Part of TAT's commitment to providing human trafficking resources to law enforcement is that 40-minute training video. So we do have a training video specific for law enforcement. Now, this is for all types of law enforcement, but we do really gear it to those that work in the motor vehicle enforcement or the commercial vehicle enforcement areas. A lot of times your state highway patrols, state police, or county police that are working out on the road and doing interdiction stops. So again, that training video and then subsequent materials. Sometimes for our law enforcement, we go in a little more depth on tips, slang, types of tattoos they may see there. And we're continuously working with survivors of domestic sex trafficking, as well as other agencies across the nation to provide updated resources and information to a lot of law enforcement that we work with throughout the country. And again, here at Truckers Against Trafficking, our training and materials are free. So a lot of agencies are restricted by budget constraints, especially in regards to budget or money. And so it's a great way for us to reach some of those rural agencies that don't always have the opportunity to receive this type of trafficking due to those constraints. And then, during non-pandemic or COVID times, we do offer a 4-hour in-person law enforcement training. Missouri Highway Patrol has received this training, and this is a great free training that covers Human Trafficking 101, that victim-centered approach, relevant case studies, and then a survivor testimony from a survivor of domestic abuse here in America.
What's the MVE model?
So our MVE model is probably one of our most successful programs that we have here at Truckers Against Trafficking. This was created by Chief Lorenzen out of the Iowa Motor Vehicle Enforcement Agency. And what this is there's 7 elements or 7 models on ways that state agencies can implement some of our programs and closing those loopholes to traffickers. Things like passing out our TAP bottle wallet cards at weigh stations. So every time a trucker comes through a weigh station entering the state of Missouri, they sometimes have to go get that inspection or get weighed. Well, we try to work with troopers to pass out that anti-human trafficking information, along with that inspection paper. Or another great example is working with the Department of Motor Vehicles. So every time someone gets a commercial driver's license, for busing or for trucking, they get their driver's license from DMV, and then DMV actually gives them some anti-human trafficking information. So it's a great intersection and great ways to really partner with state agencies to combat this issue. Right here, you can see that Missouri is doing an excellent job. So they're in full implementation. We have a great partnership with the Highway Patrol and then a few other agencies out there. But we're very grateful for our relationship and the hard work that law enforcement is doing there in Missouri. And then another way that we try to intersect with the industry is through legislation or administrative change. So right here, we have 12 states that have now made it mandatory to add anti-human trafficking training as part of the requirements for a CDL school. So when someone gets a commercial driver's license and they go to a school, an actual physical school, they are required to spend 30 minutes of anti-human trafficking training. So it's typically that TAT training. And what does this mean? Well, this means that you'll have that whole new generation of drivers out on the road that are now aware of human trafficking and how to report it. It's also a great way to let drivers that may have purchased commercial sex in the past know and be aware of the dangers of doing that kind of type of work. And then we also partner with other state agencies all across the country to implement training and then policies and procedures that really capitalize on their intersections with the commercial vehicle industry as well as potential victims. So to that end, we created a state agency webinar specifically for Department of Transportation employees or for those that work at licensing counters, so Department of Revenue, DMV, and we just ask that they play this 30-minute training video and then pass out the subsequent indicator page. And again, any of these trainings are really easily implemented, either during orientation, so new hire orientation, or if they have like quarterly or monthly safety meetings, this is a great topic to implement into a monthly safety meeting. And then in regards to, targeting the demand for commercial sex and buyers, Allison brought that up before in regards to legislation. We definitely need stiffer penalties for the buyers, because if we had no buyers, we really wouldn't have any victims of human trafficking. And so we really want to pay attention. TAP really does focus on addressing the demand for commercial sex and really trying to hold these folks accountable. And so we created our man-to-man campaign, as well as a 40-minute video addressing demand that kind of talks about the cultural conversation specifically for men or men's groups in your community. And so this is a great conversation starter if you guys work with community members, church groups, men's groups, to just sharing this video, both digitally or hard copies, to get men in your community talking about this issue, about the dangers of going to a strip club or purchasing commercial sex. A lot of times it just comes down to education. And men, myself included, we get taught what our fathers were taught. And so I think it's time to have different conversations among men in our community in regards to how we view women, and the dangers that the jokes that we say, the actions that we take that can lead to dehumanizing or objectifying women. So I think it's a great program, and we really try to encourage people to share this with everybody. And then along those lines, is creating an anti-human trafficking policy that really focuses on demand reduction. So what this is, a lot of companies out there, maybe companies that you either work for, have worked for, they don't have in their employee handbook a policy about purchasing commercial sex. And surprisingly, statistics show that a lot of folks that purchase commercial sex either do it on the way to work, during a lunch break, after work, or even on the clock. And so having a small piece in an employee handbook about, that employee's commitment not to purchase commercial sex on company time or company assets really shows that company's effort in their corporate social responsibility, but also making sure that they hire the type of people there and create a company culture that respects, victims of human trafficking and avoids creating a problem there and becomes part of the solution. And again, we provide all the sample verbiage, so it's really easy for companies to adopt into their program. And then another way, we try to work with businesses out there, not just within the trucking or transportation industry, but all businesses, is we partnered with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and created a toolkit. So this is specific. This is not specific to any one industry, but just all businesses out there. And this toolkit, one, talks about, human trafficking, what companies may see, how they may identify it, and then specific steps they can take as a company to get involved and do their part there. A great resource. So if there's, either the business that you work for, or if you work with other businesses in your community, this is a great way to either just email them this toolkit and get businesses involved in ways that they can combat the issue as well. And then, TAT's final mission is to really rally the resources of the trucking and transportation industry to combat this crime. But of course, we couldn't do this without our partnership in trucking and now shipping that really offer their time, their experience, and their influence to further this work in a myriad of ways. So as you can see right here, we have multiple partners that are partnering with TAT. They're encouraging other stakeholders to become part of the program and really getting the word out. And I'll tell you what, having companies like UPS or FedEx or Amazon partnering and getting their drivers trained, especially with COVID-19, a lot of people are ordering things, they're having things delivered. And so now we have these drivers out there that are in just about every neighborhood across our country and business areas that are trained about human trafficking, how to recognize a potential victim. So this is a great program in how to build up this huge army of eyes and ears all across our country to assist law enforcement. And the great news, it's actually working. So far, truckers have made over 2,600 calls in that national human trafficking hotline. It's led to over potential 690 cases of human trafficking and involving an astounding 1,200 victims. And again, this is just one slice of the data pie. These are only the calls going into the hotline from Polaris. It doesn't count 911 or the calls to local police departments. But it kind of really shows you, how prevalent this issue is across the industry. But then again, what this industry is doing and how they're taking ownership and combating it. And then ultimately, it really comes down to these folks, the professional drivers that are still out on the roads today, that are delivering, that are making sure that our grocery stores are stocked, that our shelves are stocked, or that we're receiving the goods. And this is Kevin Kimball. He's one of our first TAT trained, and he pulled in that same Virginia truck stop that I was telling you about in the beginning of the presentation, where Laura Swanson and Adler Hodzar were at. And he's sitting there on his break, he's sitting in the truck stop, and he looks up and, he sees a couple guys going to and from this RV, and he thought, hey, that just doesn't seem right. And then he saw a young girl's head kind of pop out the window, only for it to be snatched back violently and the curtains to be drawn in its place. And so Kevin knew that it just didn't feel right. And so he made that call to a hotline, and you guys know the rest of the story. And that girl is safely back with her family. So where their transportation is, TAT really wants to be there. We want to infiltrate those systems. We want to infiltrate that industry and those industries that intersect with our different programs. I encourage you to, if you have time, check out our website, truckersagainsttrafficking.org. There's a number of other programs that I didn't go in depth that might fit really well, and ways that you can implement that into your local community or for those that you work with. And then just to highlight some of our relationships and partnerships there in Missouri. As I mentioned, we have a great relationship with law enforcement, especially Highway Patrol. We're appreciative of them implementing the full elements of the Iowa MVE. As Allison mentioned, we're excited to co-host with the Missouri Trucking Association and the Office of Attorney General our coalition build. And what this is, it's a private training event to really get industry members, so trucking industry, busing industry, law enforcement, other state agencies, and in ways that we can educate and partner there in Missouri to combat human trafficking. So we're really appreciative. We're really excited for this coalition build. And just to give you an update, we've had about 24 out of the 108 Missouri trucking companies become trained. That doesn't seem like a lot, but actually that's doing pretty good for your state. And we're still working on those other trucking companies as well.
Louis, I'd like to add too, because I don't see it on this slide, that part of that coalition build is the St. Louis Metro bus line is a partner in that as well. And they want the bottle program to have all of their employees trained on that too. So we're anticipating huge impact on that. Great partners.
Great, Al. And then ways that you can get involved specifically. So, I talked about some of those programs. One way is to connect with your local transit or school bus manager. So, we typically partner on a state level, but our intention of, me speaking with you tonight and kind of reaching out to some of those local task forces is to find ways that, you may have a local bus system that's just right there for your county or your city. Let's find ways that, if you've been working with them in the past or you provide training, we'd love for you to pass on either their contact information or materials. Same thing with law enforcement. If you provide training for law enforcement, that may be in person or virtually right now. It's a great way to just engage with them again. You can share any of our materials digitally. So the training video, all of our materials are digital as well. So even with the challenges of COVID-19, if you're unable to do those in-person events, you can easily be able to connect with them still in a digital way or virtual way. I mentioned our demand video. It's great. So, if you are part of a particular group or you interact with a community group, especially a male-based group, share that demand video in our man-to-man campaign. And then if you're conducting outreach or you have folks that want to volunteer or get involved, we love to work with and reach and provide all those volunteers with the training and tools as well as resources to go to their local truck stops, go in there, talk to the manager and just simply say, hey, human trafficking exists. Here's some free resources. I just encourage you to train. Now, again, everything kind of really depends on the current situation with COVID and want to keep being safe, but that's still an option that, if you have a relationship or you frequent a local truck stop, emailing the manager there and just sharing those materials as well. And then finally, That's a really great tool, that Chamber of Commerce toolkit. If you go to a business, if you go to a restaurant that you really enjoy, um, I guarantee they'd probably really enjoy hearing from you and sharing this really great resource with them so they can get involved. Human trafficking, as we know, is one of the worst human rights violations of our time. A lot of us, that we desire to go above and beyond the bottom line and kind of really ensure that our careers have some major impact. Not everybody's really in a position to make that a reality. After hearing some of the things that you guys are involved in, the programs that you have, you really do have that ability. And we really hope that here at Truckers Against Trafficking, we can be a resource and complementing the amazing work that you're already doing and providing those resources that we have and that information. Here's my email address as well as my phone number. Feel free to email me. If you have questions about our programs, if there's materials that you need, I did send Nanette some of our materials, but I'd be happy, if you need some additional materials, email me. I can send you those. You could take a look on our website or our materials page. I covered just a fraction of those, but we have different posters, decals, wallet cards, training videos. And again, if you just need them on a digital format to email to friends or contacts or community members, I can provide you with that as well. So that's it. And I'll open up to any questions anybody may have.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
First of all, yes, we have seen your materials. I know Nanette and the coalition has them on the table with other materials whenever there's a public event. So I'm familiar with them and they're very nice. I'm extremely happy to see the man-to-man program because yes, it's great to have education, training, and procedures, but until we can sort of change our culture of male entitlement, it's always going to be sort of like whack-a-mole. You want to change the environment. And so I think a man-to-man program is really great. What do you do about your truckers? What can one trucker do, a trucker angel that you've been describing, what can he do when he sees a fellow trucker buying?
Yeah. I think just having that difficult conversation, we have seen, and what's so great, about the trucking industry is these are a lot of times really hardworking family individuals that take a lot of pride in their work. And like many industries from, the military to you name it, there's always those bad apples that participate and engage in the purchase of commercial sex. And the great thing about our education and training for those drivers out there is that I'm now aware of that. And we do see them having those hard conversations. We go to different trucking shows or events. I mean, the whole trucking industry has different types of events for their community. And it's great that now some of these men are educated because they're having those tough conversations. It's kind of like spreading the fire, the word to an industry that just had never heard about this before. And so to answer your question, we are seeing drivers take the stand and having these conversations with their fellow drivers out there.
Thank you.
There was a question about taxi and Uber services and also a comment about awesome list of partners, kudos TAT, and somebody saying how they love it covers school buses. But the question about taxi and Uber services?
Yeah, a great question. So we've been working, trying to work with some taxi services and Uber. It's a bit challenging. Now, Uber, we are working with Uber Freight. So there's a whole section of Uber Freight where they do deliveries. They have committed to training their drivers. So hopefully within the next year, they committed this year, hopefully by the end of this year into the first quarter of 2021, we'll have Uber Freight drivers trained. I do know there's been some conversations about getting just your typical Uber drivers trained. I don't know where that stands. I think they are looking at some internal policy changes, training changes to get drivers trained. But I don't think they'll utilize, I'm not sure right now, I don't think they'll utilize TATS training, but they are using it for the Uber Freight side.
I wanted to share a comment, but if there's a question, just jump in. But we had an individual who um, was a labor trafficking victim that ended up in Missouri and abandoned by the employer because he wasn't paying them. He ended up getting to the Midway bus stop and trying to get some help. And they actually gave him the hotline number, and the 888-373-7888 folks called our coalition tip line. And we were able to go out there and meet him and help him. And as you described, getting him some lodging, food, and hooked up with enforcement. Unfortunately, they couldn't find evidence of the motel where the um, the employer, the trafficker, had them stay. Couldn't find the work site. Couldn't find city permits that should have been um, in place for this major remodeling job, but he was given the support, the most support we could possibly give him. And then we actually bought his bus ticket to go back home to Jacksonville, Florida, so he could, move on with his life after, getting some help here. Unfortunately, law enforcement couldn't find. It was actually the Attorney General's enforcement team that tried to investigate, and they really did everything they could and couldn't find anything. But a few years before that, I had gone to the Midway, and we were talking. Those of you who know the Midway, there was like one motel person, the person who worked the store, the person who worked the restaurant, and the boss man, and just shared with that little small group of people, and wondered if it made any difference. But I was glad, whether they knew it on their own or remembered it from my being there, that they were able to give that young man the toll-free number that he called right there from the Midway bus station. Any any other questions for Louis? Oh, also, we have a law student who I was reminded of it today because we did a Zoom presentation to this law class, and